Hello, dear friends. Patrick here again. How you doing today? Shout out to Blinkers1411. Thank you, sir, for so much of your encouraging words. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for watching. And also to Charmaine Glorios and Sister Shawe. Shout out to you, Ati Shawe. God bless you. Thank you for watching. Greatly appreciate it, as always. I'm talking about the enemy of Christianity, and that's just the gentleman here, right? Let me see if I can get this. I have a bookmark in here. That's my notes. If I can get this on the screen once again, see if this will show up as a thumbnail, right? Sometimes it'll screen grab that if I hold that there for a second or two. And that is Richard Dawkins, Outgrowing God. And so I'm going to segue into covering the second chapter of that book that I've been reading, and maybe we can make some sense out of it. And that is really what my focus is. I'm not here to tell people that God doesn't love them, right? I'm here to tell people that there are enemies to the gospel out there, and we should be aware of those enemies. And this is one of them, right? Now, the interesting thing about this this particular book, this is the fourth book that I've been targeting to review by Richard Dawkins, as you may be aware. And this was published in 2019, copyright 2019, originally published in Great Britain in 2019. So this is a very recent book. It's only 5 years old. And now that I've hit the second chapter, I noticed that it's much more, how would you say, adolescent in delivery. The last one that I did, The Greatest Show on Earth, was very much targeted, you could say, at a college level or late high school or even perhaps university level audience. He was trying to be very academic, I guess you could say. You know, he's trying to talk to maybe a higher educated audience. But look at this book. The dedication, it says, the dedication of the book is for William. I don't know who that is, but somebody by the name of William. And he says, and all young people when they're old enough to decide for themselves. Did you catch that? This is the dedication of the book. The dedication is the very first page after the copyright page. And he says, for William and all young people when they're old enough to decide for themselves. So he is targeting young people. He spent the first part of his life targeting academics to try and bully academics into obviously accepting evolution as fact, to stop calling it a theory, to bully any academic that would still have any kind of belief in God as being not serious, or anybody that would even attempt to doubt any of his definitions for evolution as not being serious or not to be taken serious. And now, as if that wasn't enough, he's decided to spend the later part of his life to target young people. See, he says he was brought up Christian. He was confirmed in the Church of England at age 13. He said he gave up Christianity when he was 15. But he said he had already worked out when he was about 9 that he was when he started to doubt. So there was obviously an overlap there. Even though he got confirmed in the Church of England at 13, he says that he already started doubting at 9. So really the book is targeting people from the ages of 9 to 13 to 15. That kind of age target is what he's doing. He's kind of framing that age group by his own personal experience. And you can see that in the style of the writing, that it is directed at a younger audience, perhaps a little more immature audience. And his arguments are perhaps a little simpler and just filled with just as many lies as his academic arguments. But anyway, let's look at the notes I took from chapter 2. The first one, he talks about here, and he says, he tries to discredit the Bible in this chapter. He targets the Bible. You notice he doesn't target the Quran. Now obviously, Christopher Hitchens was much more upfront about targeting the Quran and targeting Muslims and Islam religion in particular, whereas Dawkins has certainly shied away from that. His main target is the Bible and Jesus. And here he tries to immediately doubt that both that the Bible is not reliable and that Jesus perhaps never existed. He tries to influence it, even though he admits that it's highly likely that Jesus existed. He has to say that to give himself an out, I suppose, but he tries to insert that doubt as often as he can, because he knows if he keeps repeating it over and over again, it may stick in the reader's mind, right? And he uses this example, and he mentions it many, many times. He repeats it a number of times, called Chinese Whispers is the game that it's called in England, but we would call it telephone. When you have a kid's game, and again, notice how he's targeting children, right? He says, remember this children's game, telephone, when you start with a line of people and somebody whispers something into one kid's ear at one end, so the others can't hear what they're saying, but then he turns to the person beside him and he whispers it in their ear. And then they whisper it in the ear beside them, and so on and so forth, all the way down the line. And so the first person may have whispered into the ear a very simple phrase or a very simple story, like, John went to the store and bought a bag of milk for his mom. But then it keeps getting modified as it goes down the line, and by the time it comes out on the other end, it may be all garbled, and it's good for a laugh, and the kids will laugh at how crazy the story has changed, because you're only allowed to mention it once, and you're not supposed to try and ask them to repeat it. So this is part of the game. He doesn't mention that in the game, but that's how the game is played, right? And so the last person will repeat what they heard, and it'll usually be a very funny change that has happened. And he says that this is how the Bible was written. Do you see how devious he is? He says, the Bible was probably like that. One person heard it, and then they changed it, and then it goes on down the line. And he repeats that fraud, that lie, very, very often. It's amazing that he actually includes the testimony of Josephus, Jewish historian who lived around AD 37 to around AD 100, and he talked about Jesus, and he says, there's a sentence in the phrase of Josephus. Maybe I'll just mention this here for you, because this is from the 1st century, right? And it's outside the Bible, obviously. How am I doing for time? I'm doing okay. Okay, about this time there lived Jesus, a wise man. This is Josephus speaking, a Jewish historian from the 1st century. About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was one who performed surprising deeds and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Messiah. And when, upon the accusation of the principal men among us, Pilate had condemned him to a cross, those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a 3rd day restored to life, for the prophets of God had foretold these things, and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of the Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not disappeared. So that would have been written in the 1st century by Josephus. And what Dawkins does here is very lame, but he attacks the passage. He says, a Jewish person would never say that, because he said that Jesus was the Messiah. And so that has to be a forgery. That's his reasoning. He doesn't like what the person wrote, and he doesn't like what was said. There's a birdie calling my name over here. Hello, birdie. Yeah, I can hear you. And so that's his argument. He says, it can't be real. It is real. It's part of history. And then a second one was also from the 1st century. A fellow by the name of Tacitus, or Tacitus. I don't know how to pronounce that. He's a Roman historian. He lived from AD 54 to AD 120, and he talks about this one. Dawkins accepts, because he didn't talk well of Jesus. That's why he says, this is probably true, because he didn't talk well of Jesus. He said, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out, not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. So Tacitus didn't like this Christian movement at all, and he speaks as such on page 21, is quoted in Dawkins' book. So anyway, he goes on to compare, stories about 9/11 or Kennedy, and these conspiracy theories, and he says, the stories of the Bible was just conspiracy theories. In particular, of course, he's talking about the New Testament, the Gospels, and he tries to make that comparison. So very underhanded arguments that he makes to try and put doubt in the reader. And he goes on to talk about Mary and being a virgin, and he tries to attack that, and on and on and on. So where was my first note? I want to show you how devious he is on page 27. He says here, he talks about the book of Revelation, and he says, the book of Revelation wasn't added to the canon until a century later. And he says, it's a pity it ever was. Some guy called John had a weird dream one night on an island called Patmos, and he wrote it down. Can you see how many lies he fits into such a short passage? So he says the book of Revelation, he tries to belittle it. It says, it wasn't added till a century later. And he says it's a pity it ever was. So he immediately denigrates the book of Revelation by John. And he says, some guy called John. Just some guy. He belittles John. So he insult, third insult. Had a weird dream one night. According to Revelation, John didn't have a weird dream. He said he was in the spirit on the Lord's day, and he wasn't sure if he was in the body or out of the body. He said he was having a divine spiritual revelation. That's why it's called the book of Revelation, right? He said he experienced the divine revelation from God. He says he had a weird dream, right? On the island of Patmos. Well, at least he got the island of Patmos right. And he says we all have dreams, and many of them are pretty weird. You see how he takes his lie and then he runs with it. He says, everybody has dreams. It was just a dream. No, it wasn't just a dream. It's described as not being a dream, right? He wrote it down as not being a dream, but he calls it a dream. He says, mine are always weird. I don't write them down. I certainly don't think they're interesting enough to inflict on other people. Notice he used the word inflict. So as if John is causing damage to other people by sharing this weird dream that he had. You see how subtle that lie is? That Dawkins has allowed himself to be embodied by the spirit of deception, by Satan himself. And you can see that when you have a book targeting children to promote atheism as this, you cannot find anybody alive today that is a better embodiment of Satan than Richard Dawkins. There's no doubt about that in my mind now that I've read his fourth book, or getting through his fourth book. He says, John's dream was weirder than most, almost as though he was on drugs. So he tries to insert yet another deception. Maybe he was on drugs, right? Almost as though he was on drugs. It has become hugely influential simply because it somehow got itself included in the biblical canon. And he goes on to try and belittle it more and more and more and more. And then he tries to make fun of the popular Left Behind series of books. I forget who the authors were on that. Maybe Tim DeHay or something like that. I forget. Anyway, it's not important. But he tries to mock people that believe in the rapture and things like that. And he goes on and on. I'm not going to try and repeat any of that here. Let's just follow on in my notes. So page 30, he says here, on page 30, he says the word virgin in Hebrew, Alma, it means virgin. He admits that. But he says it could also mean young woman, right? So he says maybe it's not virgin. He tries to base his lies on a misinterpretation of Scripture, and he fails there. He says that there was a discrepancy with the census taken. He doesn't give any type of historical research to back up his theory here that the census was not at the right time. There was a census. It was at the right time. And in fact, the book, The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, is far more in depth than this cursory coverage that Dawkins gives to it. And if you want to really see the truth, the veracity of the New Testament scriptures, just check out The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, and you'll be blown away. Dawkins gives it very short thrift and says, oh, there's all these contradictions in the time, and the authors had to go through hoops to make it all work together. But listen to what he says on page 33. He admits that there's about 50 known Gospels. Now, I didn't know there was that many. I know a lot of the ones that he mentions, the Gospel of Peter, Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Coptic Gospel of Thomas, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, and so on and so forth. I know that there are a lot of other Gospels, but he mentions that there's about 50 of them. I didn't know there were that many. Now, you think about that for a second. There's only 4 Gospels included in the Bible, yet there were 50, approximately, Gospels written, all from the 1st century to the 2nd century, 3rd century, and probably in that time frame. This is something that was a huge, and there are external, as we've already seen from Josephus and Tacitus, documenting the life of Christ. So there was absolutely no doubt that we're dealing with a huge historical event that was so widely covered. You would expect tons and tons of writings on such an event of somebody living and being persecuted and saying words that no one else ever said and doing so many miracles, being a huge interest to the point of having the whole population coming out to see him, to hear him preach, and to see what he does, and to heal the people and to feed the people. And then the whole issue with the crucifixion and the resurrection. Of course, there's going to be tons and tons of stories written about him, and some of those stories are no doubt going to be fringe, like the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, where the guy says that Jesus did all these wild miracles when he was a kid. So that's to be expected. There's nothing crazy about that. But he says, oh, there were these crazy stories in these other Gospels, and why should we believe Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John then? It's not a good argument at all. So let's see what else we got here. And then he tries to use the argument, great claims require great evidence, as argued by both Carl Sagan and David Hume. Carl Sagan is famous for saying extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Sagan also was an atheist. And so there was extraordinary evidence. And again, I'd have to refer you to The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. There was extraordinary evidence of the life and times of Jesus, of the miracles that he performed, of him rising from the dead, and on and on and on. And so those are the notes I wanted to share with you for today. How are we doing for time? Oh, I went way over time, so I'm going to leave that for now. I just want to leave you, before I go, with one final message, and that is from John. And it jumped out at me this morning as I was reading it, so I wanted to share it with you. John, this is an amazing section of John's Gospel, is John 18, when Jesus is actually praying. In John 17, he's praying for believers, and then it goes into John 18. But in John 17, he says, I pray for them. He says, now they know all things whatsoever you've given me are from you. He's talking to the Father. He's praying to the Father. He says, the words which you gave me, I've given unto them, and they received them. Right? He gave the words to his disciples. And they knew of a truth that I came forth from you, and they believed that you did send me. And then here is an amazing part. Jesus says, I pray for them. He says, I pray not for the world, but for those whom you've given me, for they are thine. And all things that are mine are thine, and thine are mine, and I am glorified in them. So there's this unity there with the Father, right? He says, I'm no more in the world. These are in the world, and I'm coming to you. So he knows he's going to the cross. He knows he's about to die. He says, Holy Father, keep them in thy name, which you have given me, that they may be one, even as we are. And he goes on. It's an amazing, amazing prayer, amazing prayer. And then very shortly thereafter, of course, the whole crucifixion events play out, and the resurrection, and so on. But before that, when he is before the magistrates and the and the council and Pontius Pilate and all that. This is what jumped out at me. He says in John 18, verse 23, Jesus, the Messiah, is speaking. He says, if I've spoken evil, bear witness of the evil, right? But if I've spoken well, why smitest thou me? Why did you hit me, right? A guy asked him, he says, do you say you're the Son of God? Tell us what all this stuff you're talking about, when he's in front of the council there, right? And so he says, I've spoken openly. I taught in the synagogues, temples, where everybody comes together. I didn't say anything in secret. He says, ask the ones that heard me. They know what I said. And then the guy comes and smites him. He says, do you talk to the high priest that way? That's the context of this verse in John 18, verse 34. That's the context. But think about how this can be applied to people like Richard Dawkins that are trying to smite Jesus. They're trying to say, oh, there was no Jesus. Oh, he didn't do all these miracles. Oh, he's not who you think he is. Oh, he never rose. On and on and on. They're smiting Jesus. Richard Dawkins is trying to defeat Jesus. He's trying to beat him up. He's trying to throw attacks at him at every angle he can. And he can't, right? Jesus says here, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if I have spoken well, why are you smiting me? Why are you trying to destroy me? Why are you trying to hit me? And they had no answer for that, right? The words of Christ are amazing words. There's nothing like them. Jesus said, my words are spirit and they are life. And Richard Dawkins will never talk about the words of Christ. He will only try and go around the history of the Bible and do this circuitous argument surrounding all about the life, and oh, maybe this isn't true, maybe this wasn't documented properly, maybe not that, but he is unable to face the direct words of Christ, because those words are spiritual, and he would be too convicted to be able to even repeat them. So keep that in mind. I know I went on way too long. I may have to edit this video down to get it within a reasonable time frame. I'm going to hit 30 minutes here. I don't think I've ever done a video that long before, so I greatly apologize. But it's important to realize that this is the enemy of Christianity. And in the next video, perhaps I'll tell you how England is now a Muslim country. Every mayor in every city in England essentially is a Muslim now, since the time that Dawkins probably single-handedly caused the downfall of England, probably more than any other individual, was Richard Dawkins. And the Islam, God bless them, the Muslims, God bless them, they don't listen to Richard Dawkins. They don't care about him. They are theists. They believe in God, the same God that the Israelites believe in, the same God that Christians believe in. A lot of people don't believe that, but they do. You just have to read the Quran to see that they believe in the God of Abraham. And so, despite all his efforts backfired on him. He deleted all the Christians out of the country by promoting atheism, but they were simply replaced by all the people that believe in the same God from outside the country. And so there you have it. And the ironic of ironies, the most ironic thing is that Dawkins recently said, well, I'd kind of like to live as a cultural Christian. I kind of like to enjoy my Christmas carols and Christmas tree lights and all that stuff, even though I'm an atheist. Isn't that hilarious that he wants to have his cake and eat it too? Sorry, Dawkins, your country is no longer, if it ever was at all, a Christian country. It is now a Muslim country, and you're going to have to get used to that, because the Muslim religion is far more successful than the Christian religion in today's political environment, because they want to support a religion that is a religion of submission and keeps the people in a subservient attitude. And so there you have it. Richard Dawkins, one of the most evil people in history, who has done more to destroy faith in God than any other individual that I know of, and is continuing to do so. And now he is directly targeting children. So thank you for watching. God bless you. Know who the enemy is. The enemy is not Christians, right? Don't get all hung up on saying, oh, we gotta attack Christians because they're such horrible sinners. That's not the right focus to have. The right focus is to know who the enemy is. Know who are the people that are representing Satan, that are part of Satan's army, such as Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris and people like that, and speak up against those individuals that are trying to destroy the gospel of Christ. They never will, of course, because we know that God will build his church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And so onward and forward. Thank you for watching. God bless you. I love you very much. I hope you're doing well. Again, I apologize for making such a long video. I will try and edit it down before I get it to go onto YouTube. But until then, endeavor to persevere. We'll talk to you again real soon. Take care of yourself. Bye for now.